a mop bucket, a crowd of laughter, a moment that would change everything. Marcus Chen thought he was invisible, just another face mopping floors while his classmates rushed to their next period. The 17-year-old had perfected the art of blending into the background. But when the school assembly turned into his public humiliation, Marcus discovered that sometimes the people who love us most are watching from places we never expected. What happened next didn't just silence a gymnasium full of teenagers. It rewrote the definition of what it means to be proud of your child. This is Hopeful Horizon. Before we begin, drop a comment with where you're watching from and subscribe for more stories that remind us strength doesn't always wear a Letterman jacket. Marcus Chen lived two lives in the same building. At 7:30 a.m., he was a junior at Roosevelt High, sliding into his seat in AP History with textbooks tucked under his arm. By 3:15 p.m., he was pushing a cart down those same hallways, emptying trash cans and mopping up the remnants of teenage chaos. Most students didn't even register his presence. To them, he was just another custodial worker, someone who materialized after hours to reset their world for the next day. They had no idea he'd been sitting 3 rows behind them in calculus, solving equations they struggled with, or that he'd written the essay their English teacher had praised that morning as exceptionally insightful. Marcus preferred it that way. The job at Roosevelt wasn't about glory, it was about necessity. His father worked 2 jobs to keep their small apartment, leaving before dawn for his shift at the warehouse and returning after dinner from his evening security position. Marcus had watched his dad's shoulders grow more stooped each month, had seen the way Calvin counted and recounted the bills at their kitchen table, muttering calculations under his breath. That's when Marcus had quietly approached Mr. Rodriguez, the school's facilities manager, 6 months ago with a simple request: "Let me help." The conversation had been brief but profound. Marcus explained his situation without self-pity, outlined his schedule with precision, and asked for a chance to prove himself. The pay wasn't much, minimum wage for 15 hours a week, but it covered his textbooks, his school supplies, and the small things that kept him from feeling like a burden on his father's already strained budget. The work itself had taught him things no classroom could. He'd learned that Mrs. Patterson, the chemistry teacher, stayed until 6 every night tutoring struggling students for free. He'd discovered that the cafeteria staff saved leftover food for students they suspected went hungry at home. He'd seen which teachers cleaned their own whiteboards to make his job easier and which ones left intentional messes that spoke to their character. He'd also learned to time his cleaning routes to avoid the busiest hallways, to duck into supply closets when groups of his classmates approached, to change his shirt between his last class and his first cleaning task so the transition felt more complete. It wasn't shame that drove him, it was practicality. The fewer people who connected Marcus the student with Marcus the janitor, the easier both jobs became. He could contribute in Mr. Thompson's physics discussions without worrying about someone recognizing him as the kid who emptied their classroom trash. He could submit his creative writing assignments without wondering if Mrs. Peterson would grade them differently, knowing he also scrubbed the floors of her classroom. The monthly school assembly was supposed to be about college preparedness, a topic that both versions of Marcus cared deeply about. Marcus, the student, had been looking forward to hearing about scholarship opportunities and application strategies. Marcus, the janitor, had planned to slip out early, use the time to get ahead on his afternoon cleaning checklist, and maybe finish the inventory of supplies Mr. Rodriguez needed for his monthly report. But as students filed into the gymnasium, chattering and jostling for seats with their friends, a spilled soda near the bleachers caught his attention. The sticky puddle was spreading, threatening to create a slip hazard right where students would be walking after the assembly. Without thinking, he grabbed his mop bucket from the custodial closet and headed toward the mess. He'd almost finished cleaning it up when Jeremy Kowalski spotted him. "Yo, look who decided to join us," Jeremy called out, his voice carrying across the lower section of bleachers where the seniors traditionally sat. Didn't know they were handing out assembly invitations to the help. Jeremy was the kind of student Marcus had observed from both sides of his double life, popular enough to command attention, privileged enough to never question where that attention came from, and cruel enough to enjoy it when it came at someone else's expense. As Marcus, the student, he'd watched Jeremy cheat on tests, bully underclassmen, and coast through classes on charm and his father's donations to the athletic department. A few students turned to look, some snickering already. Marcus kept his head down, focused on the sticky puddle of cola, hoping the familiar invisibility would protect him. But Jeremy wasn't the type to let a moment pass when he could make it bigger. "Hey, mop boy." Jeremy's voice got louder, more students paying attention now, the ripple effect of teenage cruelty spreading through the bleachers. "You taking notes for your GED classes, or just here to clean up after us real students?" Laughter rippled through the nearby sections. Marcus felt his face burn with embarrassment, but also with something else, a deep frustration at the unfairness of it all. Here he was, maintaining a higher GPA than Jeremy, already accepted to colleges Jeremy couldn't dream of attending, contributing to his community in ways Jeremy never would. And yet, because he held a mop instead of a lacrosse stick, he was somehow less worthy of basic respect. He continued working, hoping Jeremy would get bored and move on. Instead, the senior stood up, playing to his growing audience. "Seriously, this is embarrassing. Like, I get that someone has to clean our toilets, but does he have to do it during school hours? Some of us are trying to get an education here." The laughter grew louder, more students joining in now. Marcus could see phones coming out, knew that in 30 seconds, this moment would be captured and shared, turned into a meme that would follow him through the halls for weeks. He could also see the faces of students who weren't laughing, kids who looked uncomfortable, who recognized the cruelty for what it was, but lacked the courage to speak up. Marcus straightened slowly, mop still in hand, and made eye contact with Jeremy for just a moment. He saw the challenge there, the expectation of either fight or flight. Jeremy wanted him to either lash out, giving Jeremy an excuse to play the victim, or run away in shame, confirming every cruel assumption about his worth. Marcus chose neither. He simply nodded once, a small acknowledgement that he'd heard, that he understood, that he wasn't going to give Jeremy the satisfaction of either reaction, and turned to leave. "That's right, run along," Jeremy called after him, his voice dripping with false victory. "Assemblies for students only." As Marcus wheeled his bucket toward the exit, he caught sight of Mrs. Peterson, his English teacher, in the faculty section. She was looking at him with something that might have been sympathy, but she said nothing. Mr. Thompson was there too, the teacher who'd praised Marcus's insight in physics class just that morning, but he was studying his program. None of the adults said anything. The bystander effect was as powerful among the faculty as it was among the students. Principal Martinez took the podium as Marcus reached the gymnasium doors, his voice echoing through the sound system with the practiced authority of someone who'd run these assemblies for 15 years. "Ladies and gentlemen, I have a special surprise for you today. We were supposed to hear from our district's college counselor, but instead, we have someone much more interesting." Marcus paused at the exit, his hand on the door handle. Something in the principal's tone had shifted, less routine announcement, more genuine excitement. "Please welcome Roosevelt High's class of 2010, graduate, founder, and CEO of Chen Innovation Technologies, and one of Forbes magazine's 30 Under 30 Entrepreneurs of the Year, Calvin Chen." The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. His father's name echoed through the gymnasium sound system as polite applause filled the space, but Marcus couldn't process what he was hearing. Calvin Chen, his father, who left at dawn for warehouse shifts and came home exhausted every night, was being introduced as a successful CEO, Forbes magazine, 30 Under 30. Marcus turned around slowly, his mop bucket forgotten, watching as his dad, dressed in a sharp navy suit Marcus had never seen before, carrying himself with a confidence that seemed to transform his entire presence, walked confidently onto the stage. This wasn't the tired man who fell asleep on their couch most evenings. This was someone else entirely, someone who belonged on stages and in boardrooms, someone who commanded attention simply by entering a room. The applause grew stronger as Calvin approached the podium, but Marcus noticed his father wasn't acknowledging the crowd the way speakers usually did. Instead, his eyes were scanning the gymnasium with purpose, searching. When Calvin's gaze found Marcus standing by the exit with his cleaning supplies, his expression changed completely. Calvin Chen looked exactly like what he apparently was, a successful businessman who'd built something from nothing. But as he gripped the podium, his eyes weren't reflecting the pride of personal achievement. They were locked on his son, standing by the exit with a mop bucket, and the expression on his face was something Marcus had never seen before, a mixture of fury and fierce protective love that made the air in the gymnasium feel electric. "Thank you for that introduction," Calvin said, his voice steady but carrying an edge that made the casual chatter in the bleachers die completely. "Before I talk about college preparation and following your dreams, I want to address something I just witnessed." He stepped away from the podium, moving closer to the edge of the stage, his presence somehow filling the entire gymnasium. The students who'd been half listening, checking their phones, whispering to friends, were now completely focused on the man in front of them. "I arrived early today because I wanted to see this school again, to remember what it felt like to sit in those seats, to dream about the future from the same place you're dreaming now. I've been sitting in the back for the last 10 minutes, listening to a presentation I didn't expect. A group of students publicly mocking and humiliating someone they called Mop Boy, someone they said doesn't belong in this assembly because he's just the help." The silence in the gymnasium was absolute now. Marcus felt every eye in the building on him, but he couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't process the fact that his father was standing on that stage, defending him in front of 500 people. "I want to tell you about that young man you were laughing at," Calvin continued, his voice growing stronger, more controlled, like a lawyer presenting evidence to a jury. "His name is Marcus Chen. He's 17 years old. He maintains a 4.2 GPA while working 15 hours a week. He's been accepted to MIT, Stanford, and Carnegie Mellon with full academic scholarships to each." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Marcus saw Jeremy's face go pale, saw Mrs. Peterson sit up straighter, saw hundreds of his classmates' heads turn back toward him, with expressions ranging from shock to confusion to something that might have been the beginning of respect. "And," Calvin said, his voice carrying to every corner of the gymnasium, "he's my son." The word son seemed to echo endlessly through the gymnasium. Marcus watched as the revelation rippled through the crowd like a wave, gasps, whispers, the shuffling of feet as 500 students tried to process what they'd just heard. He saw Jeremy's face go completely white, saw Mrs. Peterson's hand fly to her mouth, saw phones being lowered as students realized they were witnessing something that couldn't be captured in a simple video clip. But Calvin wasn't done. If anything, the admission seemed to fuel him, to give him even more purpose. "Let me tell you the story you don't know," he continued, his voice carrying the authority of someone who'd spent years presenting to boardrooms and investors. 6 months ago, Marcus came to me with a problem. He'd been watching me work 2 jobs. Yes, I still work at the warehouse, and yes, I still do security shifts, and he wanted to contribute to our household expenses. But he also wanted to stay focused on his education. Calvin began pacing the stage, his movement commanding attention. "Do you know what he proposed? Not a typical teenage job at the mall or a fast food restaurant where he could work with kids his own age and complain about customers. He asked if I could help him get a job at his own school. Here, where he'd have to see his classmates every day. Where he'd risk exactly what happened here today, being humiliated by people who think they're better than him." Marcus felt tears threatening, but they weren't tears of embarrassment anymore. They were tears of recognition, of finally understanding something he'd been too close to see. "I asked him why," Calvin continued. "Why make it harder on yourself? Why not find work somewhere else, somewhere anonymous?" And you know what he told me? Calvin's eyes found Marcus again across the gymnasium. He said, "Dad, I want to serve the community I'm part of. I want to understand what it means to take care of the place where I'm learning to take care of myself." The gymnasium was so quiet that Marcus could hear the ventilation system, could hear someone's stomach growling 3 rows up in the bleachers. "So I helped him get this job," Calvin said, "not because we desperately needed the money, though every dollar helps, but because I recognized something in my son that I wanted to support. He wasn't just looking for work, he was looking for character." Calvin turned back to the crowd, his expression growing more intense. "My son has a 4.2 GPA. He's been accepted to MIT, Stanford, and Carnegie Mellon with full academic scholarships. He scored a 1580 on his SATs. He's written articles for the school newspaper under a pen name that half of you have probably read and enjoyed. He tutors students in calculus every Tuesday and Thursday after school, for free. He could spend his afternoons playing video games, hanging out at the mall, or doing any of the 100 things that typical teenagers do." The businessman gestured toward Marcus, and suddenly every eye in the building was on him again, but the quality of their attention had completely transformed. Instead, he chose to spend his time learning the names of every custodial staff member in this building. He figured out which teachers stay late and need their classrooms cleaned first so they can get home to their families. He organized the supply closet so efficiently that Mr. Rodriguez tells me they're saving money on inventory costs. And yes, he's been mopping up after students who apparently think they're too good to share space with him. Calvin's voice grew sharper, more pointed. So, when I heard you laughing at the help, when I heard you mocking someone for doing honest work, I realized you were laughing at someone who understands service, responsibility, and humility better than most adults I know. You were laughing at someone who's going to change the world, not because of his grades or his college acceptance letters, but because he knows that no honest work is beneath him and no act of service is too small to matter. Marcus felt the gymnasium's energy shifting around him. Students who'd been laughing 10 minutes ago were now looking ashamed. Teachers who'd stayed silent during his humiliation were now sitting forward, paying attention in a way they hadn't before. "There's something else you should know," Calvin said, his voice softening slightly. "Marcus doesn't know I'm here today. He doesn't know about Chen Innovation Technologies. He doesn't know that the warehouse job I've been working is actually my company's main distribution center, or that the security job is me checking on our facilities. He doesn't know that every night when I come home exhausted, it's not because I'm struggling, it's because I'm building something that will change both our lives." The admission hit Marcus like a physical blow. Everything he thought he knew about his father, about their situation, about the sacrifices being made, was suddenly revealed to be something else entirely. "I've been letting him believe we needed his help because I wanted him to learn what it feels like to contribute, to serve, to be part of something bigger than himself. I wanted him to understand the value of work before he understood the privilege of wealth. And every day, watching him come home proud of what he'd accomplished, seeing him treat every task with dignity and purpose, I've become more proud of the man he's becoming." Calvin gestured toward Marcus. "Son, would you come up here for a moment?" Every step across that gymnasium floor felt like walking through a transformation. Marcus left the mop bucket by the doors and made his way to the stage, aware of the absolute silence around him, aware that with each step he was leaving behind the boy who'd been invisible and walking towards something he couldn't yet name. When he reached his father's side, Calvin put an arm around his shoulders, and suddenly Marcus understood that everything, the jobs, the secrecy, the struggle, had been intentional, a lesson, a gift. "This young man didn't ask me to come here today to defend him," Calvin told the crowd. "He doesn't even know I'm here. But I wanted you all to meet the person I'm proudest to call my son. Not because of what he's accomplished academically, not because of where he's going to college, but because of who he chooses to be when he thinks no one important is watching." Calvin squeezed Marcus's shoulder. "He chooses to serve. He chooses humility. He chooses to see dignity in work that others mock. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is why he's going to succeed in ways that have nothing to do with money or recognition or status." The applause started slowly from the faculty section, then spread through the gymnasium like a wave. But Marcus wasn't hearing the applause. He was looking out at his classmates, some clapping enthusiastically, others looking ashamed. Jeremy Kowalski staring down at his hands as if he wanted to disappear. And realizing that something fundamental had shifted. He wasn't invisible anymore, but more importantly, he'd never needed to be. Marcus Chen didn't push that mop for recognition. He did it because character isn't built in the spotlight. It's forged in the quiet moments when you choose service over comfort, humility over pride, and contribution over complaint. Calvin Chen didn't step onto that stage to embarrass anyone. He stepped up because sometimes love means refusing to let the world diminish someone whose worth they can't see. And Jeremy Kowalski, he learned that the person you mock today might be the person who changes your world tomorrow, not through revenge, but through the kind of quiet excellence that speaks louder than any comeback ever could. This story isn't about a dramatic revelation. It's about the ordinary courage of showing up, doing the work, and trusting that character will always find its voice, even when it arrives in the form of a surprised father who couldn't stay silent while his son's integrity was being questioned. If this story reminded you that respect isn't about titles or designer clothes, let us know in the comments. Tell us, who taught you that honest work is always honorable work, no matter what form it takes? Hit subscribe for more stories that prove dignity doesn't need permission to shine. Until next time, remember that the person cleaning up around you might just be building the foundation for your future. This is Hopeful Horizon, signing off.